I brought up this video from Twitter of Merritt, who the 49ers are set to interview or did interview, not quite sure the timeline here, talking about the Super Bowl and in particular how he feels like Steve Wilks was kind of done wrong. And there's so much to unpack here. I just played it for Larry. Larry hadn't seen it, but right before we went to discuss it, I said, let's just save it for the show. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to play it again for everybody to see and digest. This is Merritt, who is set to interview. Do you guys remember? Has he interviewed yet, or is he set to interview?
I thought he was set to interview. Yeah, or he was. The report was he was set to interview yesterday, right?
Okay.
So does that?
But I didn't hear that he did for sure.
Scheduled to interview yesterday, or that he was scheduled to interview yesterday. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Either way, this is who a lot of people, including myself, got really excited about. Let's talk about his credentials for a second. He's coached for 26 years. He played linebacker. He's coached all three levels of the defense, and he has 5 Super Bowl rings. Currently the defensive back coach for the Kansas City Chiefs. Here is him talking about Wilks and the Super Bowl. I'm going to play it, and then we can unpack it. Make sure in the chat, just let me know that you guys can hear it. I know we can hear it. Hopefully you can too. Here we go.
Wilks, even himself, is looking at this as a blessing. You know what? I understand you guys want to go in a different direction, but if you want to base it clearly off of just the game, that's not the case, and we all know that. There's always something behind a marriage if it's not going well. It doesn't just happen overnight. So, but if you want to talk about the game, their offense went 3 for 12 on third down. Oops. Our offense went 9 for 19, but if your offense is going 3 for 12 on third down, is that Wilks' fault? If your tight end, who's all pro, Kittle, only has 1 catch for 4 yards, is that Wilks' fault? No. I mean, so therefore you can feed McCaffrey all you want to. He needs help. And then number 11, who was trying to fight all game, Aiko, whatever, I don't know. He only had 40-something yards. Was that Wilks' fault? So I just say that there was something going on before. This all went down.
Oh, man. That's pretty good. I like that. Say here.
All right. That is the end of it. We didn't get a full chance to discuss backstage. Here we are. We are just kind of listening to it together for the first time. So, Larry, I'll start with you. What are your initial thoughts after hearing that?
Who's Aiko?
Brandon Aiko, you don't know?
Well, that's kind of disrespectful. I mean, come on, man. I mean, this is Brandon Ayuk. He's an all-pro wide receiver. You're calling him Aiko? I don't know.
That's out of pocket.
that seemed odd. I mean, I think that if your premise is wrong, your conclusion is wrong. So if your premise is that Steve Wilks was fired because of anything that happened in Super Bowl 58, then I think your conclusion is wrong, because I don't think that's why he was fired. He's kind of going with the assumption that was whatever happened that day was the reason that Steve Wilks was not brought back.
I don't think he is. I mean, just real quick, because he said that there's no way they can be going just based off the Super Bowl. There had to be problems to that marriage prior, because if we're going off the Super Bowl, it was the offense, not the defense, I think is what he said, just to clarify.
I hear you. All I would say is, it clearly, obviously he doesn't cover the 49ers. It clearly wasn't about the Super Bowl. It was clearly, I got the vibe going into the Super Bowl that Steve Wilks was on touchy ground. Steve seemed really agitated in the media sessions leading into the Super Bowl, especially when Chase Young's effort was called out, and nobody pointed the finger at Steve necessarily, but he was clearly disgusted with some of the players. I think there was a little bit of a disconnect between what the Niners did up front and what the Niners did on the back end. And I had asked Steve Wilkes in October, are you calling the games up front, or is Chris calling the games up front? Because I think Chris called the games up front last year, or 2 years ago, I should say. And he said, no, I'm calling all that stuff. I'm dialing up everything up front. So if you're dialing up everything up front and you're dialing up everything on the back end, how do you have situations where you're hurrying up the quarterback and playing soft coverage behind it? How does that making sense? And I just think there were a bunch of examples like that happened in the Minnesota game, in the Cincinnati game, and then in the playoffs, they didn't stop the run. I don't personally blame Wilkes for the fact they didn't stop the run, but he is the defensive coordinator. So, I mean, if I made the prediction going into the Super Bowl. I said if the Niners fall short in the Super Bowl, Shanahan will not blame himself, and there will be somebody to blame, and Wilkes will wear it, and Wilkes will be gone. So I'm none of this really surprises me. But I hear what he's saying. He's basically just saying that Kyle doesn't point the finger at himself, and that there were examples to point the finger at himself after the Super Bowl, and he chose to replace the defensive coordinator. But the assumption is that he replaced the defensive coordinator because of something that happened in the game. I don't think that's the case.
What do you think about all this, Fish?
Well, I think people are taking Merritt's words way too literally. Like, he's not paid to analyze the 49ers and be right about the details of Steve Wilkes' signings. He's focused on the Chiefs secondary. I think he's just making a point because they won the game and he has the right to talk smack. And he was the coach of the secondary that held Kittle to 4 yards. And he's reminding you of that. He was the coach of the secondary that held Aiko, as he called him, to less than 40 yards. And he's reminding you of that. So I think this is just him talking smack. I think that's all this is. I'm just more intrigued by Merritt's resume in general, because hearing him talk like this is interesting to me, right? You brought up, Jesse, that he's coached in all three levels. This guy was the defensive backs coach with the Giants from 2006 to 2017. If you look at a lot of the young players, especially in his early tenure that they developed, right? They got Corey Webster to play like a number one corner in the Super Bowl season. He played very well in the 2011 season, too. People might remember him shutting down Michael Crabtree, 1 catch for 4 yards in that NFC Championship game. He got Aaron Ross from Texas to play very, very well early in his career. Jabril Wilson was a good safety for them back in the day. So he got a lot of young players to produce. But what I found interesting is when Spags, after they won the Super Bowl and the year after they went 12-4 with the three-headed monster of Derek Ward, Ahmad Bradshaw, and Brandon Jacobs, when Spags left, they did not promote him to become the defensive coordinator. They promoted Bill Sheridan, I think, who was the linebackers coach at the time. And then when they fired Sheridan after 2 bad years, they went and got an outside hire in Perry Fewell. All this time, Merritt was still the defensive back and safeties coach. He outlasted Spags with the Giants. He was there for 11 years. Why did he never get promoted in that time would be my question, given that the Giants did exchange defensive coordinators for an extended period of time and he was a longer tenured coach. So I don't really have an issue with what he had to say here. I don't really care about it. He's just talking smack. He was the winning coach. I don't think it's that deep. I don't think Kittle or Aiko are taking this as personally as fans are taking it on their behalf. I think it's football, it's the business. The guys that are actually participating in the sports are allowed to talk to each other a certain type of way because they're about to compete with each other. So that's okay. But my question with Merritt would be, why has it taken so long? Because it seems like everywhere he's gone as a secondary coach, he's been successful, and he's been successful with young DBs.
Okay, so let me ask you this. I'll change the question up a little bit. This interview supposedly took place last week. He either interviewed yesterday or we got word that he was set to interview in the upcoming days. Does this at all impact his ability to coach the San Francisco 49ers defense? Vish, this time I will start with you based off of this interview. Or should it?
I don't think it should. Again, like I don't know that this, like, other than Aiko, I think Larry was right. Aiko was maybe a little too out of pocket and that was maybe personal. I don't think this was like that deep. Again, he coached the winning team. I hope that the Niners want this kind of bravado and confidence if they feel like the right fit as their defensive coordinator. I think that his merits on how he is as a coach, how he communicates in his interviews, and then how he feels like he can mesh with Kyle and the players will ultimately decide whether he's the defensive coordinator or not. A lot of players say a lot of things and then go be teammates with each other. I think people take this so personally. Like Draymond Green said he would never be teammates with Chris Paul. And look at Chris Paul and him slapping each other on the butt every other possession and hugging each other. And as Charles Barkley would say, singing Kumbaya. This is all overrated with how personally this is. This is a sport. I don't think that him saying this is affecting whether he gets the job. It's about his merits as a coach and how he does as an interviewer in the interviews.
All right. What do you think, Larry?
Oh, you're joking, right? The central figure of any NFL organization is the head coach. This guy is on a podcast questioning the head coach of who's empowered to either hire him or not hire him. I mean, to me, it either seems like he knows he doesn't want to coach for Kyle Shanahan, is upset about something in the process of the interviews, or is just has a kind of a self-destructive bone in his body because you're questioning Kyle Shanahan, the guy whose decision it will be to hire you or not hire you. And to me, that how I mean, come on. Is Kyle Shanahan really going to hire a guy who just went on a podcast and openly questioned his decision to part ways with his defensive coordinator to begin with?
But he's defending the defensive coordinator, right? He's not questioning the head coach. I think it comes across that way, but I think his what he's trying to do in this case is question the defensive coordinator. And then in terms of what he said, I don't find it to be self-destructive. Let me ask you this, Larry. Who's your favorite interview with the 49ers that comes to the podium every week? Who's your favorite interview? I've heard you say it before. It's Forrester, right?
Well, I mean, he gives long answers for sure.
Right, he gives long answers. But the thing with Forrester is we're talking about a long-tenured position coach, not a lot of media training. He's just a football coach, and he talks like a football coach. He doesn't give you media-trained, polished answers like a Robert Saleh, who's trying to market himself as a head coach in every media opportunity he gets. That's this guy as well. This is a long-time position coach. He's talking like very normally and naturally. He's talking on a local Kansas City show. This isn't him going on a national platform and doing something. It's a local show after they won the Super Bowl. Those guys are most likely Chiefs fans. He's speaking up for a fellow coach in the industry. I didn't find it to, I guess I cut you off. So maybe my bad there, but I didn't find it to be as like, oh, he's just going after Kyle here and self-sabotaging himself. I think there's a lot of context to the situation he's in and why he feels comfortable talking like that.
Do you feel after hearing that he's more or less likely to be named the 49ers defensive coordinator?
I don't think this should be a deciding factor. Like, I think you're
going
to go through an interview process.
Forget should be. Just, do you think he's more or less likely to be hired as the 49ers defensive coordinator based on those comments?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how likely he was.
I would say less. I would say less. Like, you're questioning the head coach. You're basically saying that Steve Wilks did not deserve to be fired, or did not deserve to not be extended, I guess, or whatever. I don't know. Was he fired? Was he extended? Or was he not extended? I don't know his exact contractual situation. But I let's just say this. Think of all the coaches that have coached under Kyle Shanahan. Have you ever heard any of them in a public forum question him the way that this guy appears to be questioning him?
Yeah, when he was in Washington. Bunch of articles written that way. I've heard.
Who was it?
This summer in the Play Callers podcast, he literally almost verbatim, like not verbatim, he like blamed Kyle Shanahan. He basically made us infer he indicated that Kyle Shanahan not promoting him up the totem pole is what led him into alcoholism. He said stuff like that. He said that he was the genius. Like, he would say stuff like, I was the one coming up with the plays and not getting credit. I don't have the exact quotes off the top of my head, but Jesse, do you think those are fair summarizations of what he was saying in the
Yeah, McDonald. You're talking about McDonald?
Yeah.
Yes.
McDaniel, yeah.
Or McDaniel,
I would say that I think that Merritt will not be hired as the 49ers defensive coordinator. Because I think it makes it sound like he believes that Steve Wilks got a raw deal. And I just think that that's fine to believe that, and it's fine to state that, but you're basically the guy who gave him the wrong deal. If we're supposed to believe, that Kyle's the boss, is Kyle. So ask to think that he would say that, question Kyle's decision to get rid of Wilks and would be Kyle's chosen handpicked guy, I say probably not. I would, my guess is that, one of the issues that I think Wilks had with Kyle is that Kyle Wilks did not earn the trust of Kyle across the board. Otherwise, Kyle would have just blindly supported every one of his decisions. He didn't blindly support every one of his decisions. In fact, he did the exact opposite. He called him out publicly after the Minnesota game and expressed frustration seemingly against Wilks on the field during the Super Bowl. So I would say, I don't know. I don't know. It's a very interesting deal there with Merritt, but I'd almost bet everything that I have that he won't be the choice now after listening to that.
Do you think he would have been the choice to begin with, though?
He probably should have been. I mean, he's got 5 Super Bowl rings, and as you stated before, I mean, this guy's done really good things at his previous stops and is wearing 5 rings. And I loved. Now they won because of their talent. He didn't make McDuffie. He didn't make Sneed. But you know what? He probably helped make them the players that they are, right?
I mean, they've had a history of developing corners from Ward to Sneed. So they got Brashard Breeland to play his best football.
I mean, I can make an argument that Merritt,
McDuffie,
of the guys that I've read are connected, may have the best resume of the guys who are rumored to be candidates, but doesn't mean he's going to get the job.
Let me switch the question up just slightly, because you said something that I think is very poignant, and we just kind of brushed over it because we were getting into the conversation, Larry. But you started out your talking point saying that you thought that Wilks would be fired if they didn't win because you knew that Kyle wouldn't take blame on himself.
Blame himself, right.
Blame himself. Okay.
And would need to blame somebody.
Right. Okay. So with that being said, now you don't think that they will hire Dave Merritt, but do you think he should hire Dave Merritt because Dave is a guy who might be able to hold him accountable and wouldn't be afraid to kind of tell it like it is?
I'm a believer that you become better and bigger and stronger when you have dissenting opinions in the room. When you have strong, powerful disagreement. I think that is when you challenge, when everybody's challenged, I think it's a good situation. So I don't know that Merritt's the right guy because I don't know exactly what scheme he wants to run, and I wasn't privy to that interview, but I like the idea of a strong-minded guy who challenges everybody's opinion, including the guy at the top of the masthead. I personally think that's when you get better. When everybody's challenged. So I like the idea of having some uncomfortable. I mean, I was in the Canadian League. We watch film every day. There were 3 or 4 fistfights over the course of the season between the defensive staff. Now, I didn't start any of them, of course, because I was just the low guy in the poll, the GA. But the quality, the QC or whatever, the quality control guy. But man, there was, and we had the second best defense in the league. You know, we got our work done. We had volatility. There were punches thrown. We did emerge from that as better. And I'm a firm believer that it's volatile, and that if, you'd rather have open dialogue than a pecking order and guys worried about their job. And on that staff, Kay Stevenson was the head coach. Bill Urbanek was the defensive coordinator. Bill Bradley was the defensive back coach. These guys threw hands over coverage, over responsibility, over 2 inches of film, increments of movement. I mean, just there were fights. I mean, literal fights. Like, you blaming me? Yeah, I'm blaming you. Your guy screwed up. No. That's your guy. That's your guy right there. Take me through it. All of a sudden, now here it's 30 seconds later, and guys are throwing blows. So, but we went from like dead last in defense to number 2 in defense that year. So I kind of am a believer that there's hard conversations in the locker room between players. There's hard conversations in the coaches' room between coaches. None of it ever bleeds out to the media for the most part. But I really think that's the preferred route, as opposed to, he's been here for 20 years, so everything he says is right. He's been here for 10 years, so everything he says is right, except if the guy who's been here for 20 years says he's right. And I've been here the least amount of time, so everything I say is wrong. I don't like those kind of pecking orders, because that squelches and that quiets dissent, and dissent, I think, helps us get better.